that's me. He's already said it, so I don't need to perseverate about it. That's the new school of psychotherapy and counseling, which I founded in 1996. We run 5 master's programs and 2 doctoral programs, all in psychotherapy, psychology, coaching, etc. That's the Existential Academy, which I co-founded with my husband, also in London. And we run short courses there. It's not for profit, so it's all about passing it on to the wider public. There it is. That's where we also run our private practice dilemma consultancy. But as he said, I am the president of the Existential movement, which is a worldwide movement of anyone interested in existential ideas, and it is about bringing wisdom to a world that I think is very much in need of a little bit of wisdom just about right now. These are the 20 books I have published to date, and they are, Thank you. And that's the latest one that came out a few months ago. So that's on my method called Structural Existential Analysis. And this book is written particularly for doing qualitative research. So we do a lot of qualitative research with our doctoral students. We have about 600 students. 4/5 of those are doctoral students. And they all have to do a big piece of research, and we're learning more and more. We have a book coming out, an edited book coming out in August about an existential approach to trauma work, which will be very interesting indeed. Okay, that is the book I am currently finishing. I have sent the final manuscript to Penguin. That's my first trade book, so my other 20 books are academic books. This is a trade book, so I hope to bring these ideas to a wider public. But today we're going to focus on this, purpose and paradox. Why? Because from an existential perspective, polarities are not just opposites or conflicts, but they are part of a paradox and the spectrum of life. And that's the point I want to get across. Why? Because when life has purpose, it is much easier to encompass the breadth of those oppositions and to hold them close to yourself and to explore that whole territory, taking ownership of it. Purpose is, of course, the reason for which we do or create things in the world, with a sense of resolve and determination. That is, if life is going well. When it isn't going so well, we lose our resolve and our determination, and we retreat, and we become, pained by life. And as I said, paradox is a seemingly absurd and contradictory idea or situation, which usually turns out to actually be well-founded and therefore holds tremendous power. So the idea of paradox has been talked about for millennia. And I like to go back millennia because I started out as a philosopher. I've got a doctorate in philosophy as well as a master's in philosophy. And before I did my clinical psychology for my sins. And of course, it is mostly known for this statement when you say this statement is false. That seems paradoxical because if it's true, then what I say is a lie. And if it's false, then the statement was false as well. So you can't win. but actually it shows up something. The other paradoxes that are well known in philosophy are the ones of Achilles and the tortoise, the moving arrow. They're all paradoxes of continuity and motion and infinity. These are ones that you will know. Things like youth is wasted on the young. Is it? Youth is what young people are. So it's a strange statement, but think about it. Less is more. People love to say that these days. The more you give, the more you get. It's probably very true most of the time, but it's nevertheless paradoxical. A lot of life is paradoxical. I'm very fond of freedom cannot be obtained without discipline, which seems like a lack of freedom, or without responsibility. And this is very true. And it is something many of our clients are in the process of discovering. The other one is, the only constant is change. Or I can resist anything but temptation. The more you know that you don't know. And you know who said that, don't you? We'll come to it. So, paradox features very strongly in existential therapy because as a philosophical method, it explores our ways of being in the world and bases itself on people like Socrates, who spoke about paradox a great deal. Existential work is always about improving your understanding of the world and of your client's world and of greater engagement with human existence. After each session, be it with one individual, with a couple, or with a group, and I like to work with groups, or an organization, no matter what I do after that session, my brain has been renewed. My vision of my own life has been updated. Something has shifted, something has happened, some new understanding has entered into the room. Because if I engage with the problems you bring, those problems are always relevant to me as a person and a human being as well. So we approach problems in living in a creative, active, engaged, and reflective manner. We always look for new meaning and new purpose. And it's all about the search for truth, and in that process, for courage as well. So we do it in a constructive dialogue, always a dialogue, and we take the other beyond a position in which they blame others, blame themselves, or blame the world, or blame life, or live with shame about who they are. Nobody should ever have to live in shame. This is something, by the way, I stole from Nietzsche. That's what Nietzsche said. Okay, we do not use a system of psychopathology, but instead we use a system of modes of being. All will come clear. We focus on life as it is lived by the person. We try to help the person to get a sense of orientation in their life, a sense of overview, a sense of direction, a sense of connection, a sense of having, probably for the first time, the feeling that they are at the center of their world and they can own that fully and wholly. Each of us can. So, in a philosophical view of human existence, it's always about meaning and purpose. How do we understand the world? How do we want to go forward? What it is possible to do in a life? What are the difficulties with that? What are the solutions to those difficulties? How are we going to train ourselves up to be better at this difficult thing called living? The role of anxiety, guilt, despair, and suffering for existential therapists is always central and elemental. We use many other philosophical methods. We talk a lot about, well, amongst ourselves, not with our clients. We talk a lot about ontology, which is the science of being. In other words, what does it mean to be? How can we be? How can we make sense of being? We talk a lot about meiotics, which is a Socratic thing. It means to bring out what is hidden. In some ways, psychoanalysis is a meiotic form of therapy. It is about bringing out something that was hidden previously. Hermeneutics, which is to search for an interpretation of something. But hermeneutics is a science of interpretation that does not give people an interpretation that comes from dogma or theory. It is an interpretation that is derived from the person's own life, from their meanings, from their values, from their worldview. So it is an interpretation that is alive rather than dead. We also use the method of heuristics, which is to check back with personal experience, to feel into something, to figure out whether this is actually true for me or not. It is about learning to consult yourself and to trust that you have all you need in order to know who you are, where you are, what has happened, what has gone wrong, what the road ahead might look like, and what choices you might want to make, and what direction overall you want to take in order to get, at the end of your life, somewhere near where you hope to be. It's always about dialectics, which is about holding opposites in a paradoxical way. Not in order to come to a middle ground or a common denominator, quite the opposite. Dialectics is always about encompassing two opposites and broadening the field. You do not narrow it. You do not say this or that. You say, I know there's this and I know there's that. And both of these things have a role to play. How can we make room for both? And when I work with couples, the objective is for each of the partners to make room in themselves, both for their own feelings and perspective and experience, and for the other's feelings and perspective and experience. And each of them will be so much the richer for having learned to make room, rather than learning to bloody compromise all the time and resent the hell out of each other. That's no way to live, is it? Right, I use this four-world system. There's nothing original about that. The Kabbalah had 4 worlds. There are 4 divisions. In many ways, 4 seasons in the years, 4 quarters of the moon. It's just a way to cut up the cake. And it happens to fit very nicely with Jung's 4 functions and various other things. So we've got the physical level of existence, the social level of existence, the personal level of existence, and the spiritual level of existence. Make no mistakes about the spiritual level. It means the search for truth, value, and meaning. It's the level at which we have ideas about the world, we have theories about the world, and we make meaning. And if you happen to do that in a religious way, that's fine. But if you happen to do it in a scientific way, that's fine too. So everybody has a meaning dimension, and at each of those dimensions, it's riddled with paradoxes. And it helps a lot to be familiar with that map of the world, because it helps you to orientate yourself when you are lost in the woods of your clients' lives, and you need to know where you are with them in order to be able to get out of the woods again. So, briefly, physical life, death, social love, hate, personal strength, weakness, spiritual good, evil. That's it. That's all you need to know. That was the spatial dimension. Then we add to that time, and we work with the dialectic of time. Little book Claire Arnold Baker and myself wrote in 2018. We came up with this diagram, and that is all about realizing that while the person always presents here, they're in the present, they are what they present to you phenomenologically. In that present, a lot is going on. And it goes back to the past, it goes into the future, and it's like a constant figure 8. And the present is at that intersection between what we take back with us from the past and what we project into the future. But as we circle around in our figure 8, we go further and further, and in some ways that reflection on time always takes us into eternity. So this shows it you better. You're in the present, but your thoughts go back to the immediate past, which is about what I did just now or what I did yesterday. And it also goes back to the distant past, where you take memories back of things that have happened, that are still in process, that you still learn from, that you still need to reflect on. There are more and more such things as you gather pace and get older. And the same is true for the future. What will I do in the next hour when this talk is finished? What will I do tomorrow? What will I do with my life in the distant future? All of that is going on all the time. And it's extremely helpful to have an image of that and to understand that it is often about tensions and paradoxes. So Nietzsche in Twilight of the Idols said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow." This is made famous by Viktor Frankl, who spoke about that. And it sums up the need to have a purpose, because that is what allows you to make sense of what you're doing, of the frictions, the difficulties, the annoyances, the conflicts, the dilemmas, the paradoxes. And it's like riding a bicycle. It is something you have to do in order to stay upright. If you have forward momentum, you can ride your bicycle very nicely and you stay upright. As every child of 4 knows, you have to get going, and then you have to know where you're going and then it will keep motoring, and it will feel good. But if you get on that bike thinking, oh my God, it can't balance, how can it be? It's so narrow, how can I find my equilibrium? You just get anxious and more anxious, and you'll fall one way and you'll fall the other way, and you start to think that you cannot do it. And if you go on the bike and you have no idea where you're going and you steer in the wrong direction, you get going a little bit, but then you fall over. Life is very much like that, to make it very simple. But it is also about collecting pieces of the puzzle. Every experience you have in life, you learn something. Every single time something goes wrong and you have to find a solution, another piece goes on the puzzle, and it clicks nicely together in place with the pieces that were there before, which takes us back to our dialectic of time, because that's the game you're playing. You're collecting things from the past, and sometimes, you realize that there were 20 pieces to be collected from something in the past that you just neglected and never thought about. And when you go back to that memory, you find it and you put it in your pocket, and you know that you're beginning to make some sense of things, and you see the shape of things evolving. This is how we create meaning. Meaning is the connectivity between the things in this world, the patterns that are there for us to play with, to recognize, to collect, to make our own, and to feel mastery over. And the more you collect up, and the more you feel that sense of mastery, and the greater your life becomes. That's how it works. And the brain does exactly the same thing. It has all these neurons sitting there, 85 billion of the things. Just think about it. 85 billion neurons. Each of them is like a person. It's so clever. Each neuron is so clever. You got an army sitting there in your head, working for you. 85 billion of them every day. Plus another 84 billion other cells are also very useful, by the way. And all of that gets interwired and interconnected. Exactly like what I said about making meaning. It's like collecting the pieces, but it's also about getting the neurons to work together and to keep wiring up so that it works better. And we know we can make new neurons as well. When I studied psychology, I was told, you come with 80,000 and never will you have another one. So every time you have a drink, you're destroying some of your, you recognize it. That's what we were told. It's not true. We now know, in the hippocampus, we make new neurons even just when we've parked our car, and we make a few connections there, and sometimes a new one, to remember where it's parked. It's extraordinary. So it's just all happening. And then, as we're wiring it all up, and we're creating the meaning and the connections, these horrible things happen to us out of the blue. Terrible crises happen. And they do. And you will not escape from that. It happens to us all. To some people more than others though. And when it happens, it feels like everything is in danger. Your whole entire life feels meaningless. because your connections are gone. Right, I decided to do a little bit of autobiographical information here. I think it's quite important to own up. That's me at 17 there. At 17, I tried to take my life twice. I hung myself and I took an overdose, 10 days apart. And I told nobody. When I hung myself, it was a very foolish attempt, and the whole ceiling came down. And my father became extremely angry with me for having messed up the ceiling. I didn't tell him what I'd done. But 10 days later, they found me in bed. In the morning, I couldn't get up. I couldn't wake up. I did it in the evening. I didn't tell anybody. But I didn't die. I was still alive. And they did a genius thing. Instead of saying, our daughter is mentally ill, we need to see a psychiatrist, my father went to the head of my school and he said, I've got a daughter who is a philosopher, and she's come to the conclusion that this is a shit world and she doesn't want to live in it. And he was right. And so the head of the school invited me over to tell him what I was upset about. And I spoke to him for 2 hours about Vietnam and about how Jan Palach had set himself to fire in the Czech Republic, and how I didn't think that there was room in this world for me, that I was too weak and that I couldn't deal with it, and I didn't want to have anything more to do with it. And he said, in his amazing wisdom, he was close to retirement, Zweers he was called. He said to me, Emmy, you are a poet. You need to publish your poetry, because I told him I wrote poems. He said, you write songs. I'll make sure you can sing your songs in the cabaret in school. You have political ideas. I'll help you do something in the school to change the atmosphere. I told him that I hated the way the teachers were with us and infantilized us, and we couldn't even call them by their first names, and what kind of world was this, and all that sort of thing. So I did all these things. I was facilitated to publish my poetry, to sing my songs, not just in my own school, but in another school, and I got interviewed for it, and I found my voice. I found a purpose. I found some confidence. I began to see that when I thought I was weak, I was wrong. I was just a bit more sensitive than the average kid, and I was very deep and very thoughtful, but these were not bad things, and they certainly didn't make me bloody mentally ill. It just meant I needed to be shown that there were other ways, that there were pathways. And what's more, I think what the head of my school inspired in me was the slightly grandiose idea that the world might need people like me. And that was the thought, I think, that helped me to do everything I've done. Every time it was hard, or people ridiculed me, or ignored me, or put me in a corner, or put me down, or stole my business from me, as happened, every time that happened, I reminded myself, you can do it. This world needs other voices. It needs you to carry on. It needs you to say it how it is from your perspective. There needs to be a change, and you've got to be part of that change. I learned to have existential courage. And I learned that once you've tried to take your life twice, nothing else is frightening anymore, because that's a really hard thing to do. Let nobody ever tell you it's easy to commit suicide. It is very, very hard to make that decision and to implement it. After that, I hitchhiked around France with a girlfriend, and we sang in restaurants, and we earned all of our money for the whole month's trip from our singing. Well, after that, I was ready to go to France and study philosophy. It was still bloody hard, but there it is. What I learned is what Simone de Beauvoir says in The Mandarins. You can't lead a proper life in a society which isn't proper, in which every way you turn, you are always caught. A lot of people feel that, but they blame it on themselves. They are wrong. They are in the right. They know there is something wrong with the way humanity has progressed, and we need to set it straight. Because you can't draw a straight line in a curved space. Your difficulties may be your best guide in that. So why was it easier for me to live after I had faced death? Because you have to explore both sides of the equation to understand about the paradox. Yes, it was good to be brave enough to want to die, but was I brave enough to live? I could say no to society, but could I also say yes? I will be part of this society, and I will do my utmost to make it a little bit more what I needed it to be when I was 17. That was my guideline. So embracing the paradox is a powerful thing. You stretch yourself to match what is demanded of you. You learn from your failures. You learn that loss and disappointment help you shoot deep roots into your life. It's not really about you anymore. It's about life. You have married yourself to the truth of life. That is what happens. So I discovered that there were good and kind people, as well as a lot of destruction in the world. I did all these things I told you about. And then I went on a strange path. I married a French psychiatrist, and because of that, I started living in psychiatric hospitals because he was given houses in the hospital. And I started working with patients. So I have been in full-time psychotherapeutic work since 1973. That is exactly 52 years. And I came to the UK in 1977 to work with the existential psychiatrists Joe Berg, Morty Schatzman, and R.D. Lang. And that's what that was like. So for a year, I lived and worked in a therapeutic community, and that was transformational because I had to walk in the shoes of the patients rather than wearing a white coat and have a role to play. I found that very hard, but I did it, and I learned that that wasn't good enough. That's not what they needed. What they needed was structure and understanding and some idea of a map and a compass of life so they could do it on their own, but not to be left to their own devices. Ronnie Lang still had a lot to teach us in psychotherapy. He talked about being out of your body and out of your mind and having to find your inner world back. He talked about psychotherapy being an obstinate attempt of two people to recover the wholeness of being human through the relationship between them, which was very wise. And he said, which I quoted in the book on structural existential analysis, that the psychotherapeutic relationship is a search constantly reasserted and reconstituted for what we have all lost, and which some can perhaps endure a little more easily than others. So after that year, I was very fortunate to be invited to live in Esselen for a month, where I learned Gestalt therapy on top of the Lacanian analysis and the psychodrama I had learned previously. And I worked with the Mental Research Institute and a little bit with the Soteria project. I stayed a night at one of the Soteria houses, which was much, much less liberal than the Arbors and PA houses. And I discovered, other ways of connecting with people. And then after that, I basically knew that I had to create my own way of working, which was based in phenomenology, which I had learned from my master, Michel Henry. So it was all about helping other people to find their inner authority in the face of their anxiety about a world that often lacks in fairness, coherence, and meaning. And for me, that was the path of existential therapy, which I more or less created in the UK, and that has now reverberated all around Europe, all around the world. Jalom, of course, did an enormous work making that more well known. Alfred Langley did an enormous amount to do that in a slightly different way, but I think all of us are coming together. We created the World Confederation for Existential Therapy. But more importantly, Bruce Wampold, who you will know as one of the most famous psychotherapy researchers, said not so long ago, it could be that an understanding of the principles of existential therapy is needed by all therapists, as it adds a perspective that might form the basis for all effective treatments. And I would say absolutely so, because the difference between somebody getting up again and getting going again, and I'm really talking about very serious problems. Working in psychiatry, I worked a lot with schizophrenics and autistic people and other forms of psychosis. I even saw schizophrenic people in private practice. They will only really turn a corner if something crucial falls into place. You can't do it just a little bit. The person has to come to a new awareness, to a new insight into what's gone wrong and how they might, just might, be able to find themselves again when they were previously lost. So I love this Magritte painting. I love most things by Magritte. Everything that's visible hides something that is invisible, he said. And it's not just about the unconscious, it's about everything. Most of life is unconscious. Very little of what we do or see or what is there is in our awareness, is something that we reflect on. So we need to hunt for what is unseen, unsaid, misunderstood, the invisible, the unexpressed, the reality unknown, or purloined. Purloined means that we have hidden it. And we do a lot of that. We hide our truth to ourselves. We do not take our capacity for intentionality and meaning searching anywhere near seriously enough. So, in existential therapy, we seek to find deeper understanding and wisdom. It's about getting to a different dimension of existence, really. And that comes very often through holding the tension of the polarities. It's about working with what I call the ontodynamics of life. The dynamics of life itself, rather than just the psychodynamics. Of course, psychodynamics are part of that, but only a small part. This is a typical philosophical approach here, where we start with facticity, which are the facts of life. Things that are true for all people, whether we like it or not. The fact that we are temporal creatures, that we are beholden to the earth for our gravity that makes life possible, that we move around in space, and that, as I said earlier, that movement makes a big difference. How we move in that space and how much freedom we have in that situation makes a huge difference. Entropy, the fact that everything decays as well as growth. I was at the Hilton Hotel in 1978 when Carl Rogers and Ronnie Lang met up for their face-to-face, a historical battle of the giants. They both fell, as far as I'm concerned. It was a sad, sad day. It was the day that I decided I was going to have to make my own tracks. Nothing new there. Entropy means that when you eat, you've made a mess and you have to do the washing up. And when you've done the washing up, it's not finished because the next day there will be more washing up. It means that everything you build also crumbles. But the art is in knowing that when you work together in community, you support each other, and overall we keep things growing together because it's a joint effort. We have to labor in order to survive. That is a fact of life. And if we don't labor for our lives, we die. We will all fall ill, and we have to learn to deal with illness too, and some people more than others. And it strengthens you in a paradoxical way, and I know many examples of that. We all have failures in our life. Many failures. I'm sure you can think of many of your failures, and I'm sure that you will know that your failures have often been the moments when you had to consult yourself, be honest with yourself, and ask yourself where you went wrong. Failures are the start of good things. We all have to suffer losses, and there's an art in suffering losses, as all psychotherapists know. And ultimately, we will all die. We need to have different listening levels of engagement. We listen to the person's experience. We search for the meaning of that experience, and that starts by figuring out what are the person's values that are under threat. We need to research the facts. Is it threatened? How is it threatened? What is threatened? We need to understand in contemplation, what is the situation? How can we put that puzzle of meaning together? What are the limitations? What is the reality? And what are the possibilities? What possible futures are there? What transformation can we have? How can we shift it a level? Ricoeur spoke a lot about narrative ways of living through time. When we tell a story about ourselves, we bring ourselves into the world as an other. We see ourselves from a different angle. It is very enlightening. And when we are in dialogue with another, that is what happens. And it always involves the archaeology, the landscapes of the past, and the teleology, the future as you imagine it. Sartre said, a lucid view of the darkest situation is already in itself an act of optimism. Indeed, it implies that the situation is thinkable. The very fact of being able to talk to somebody about what is happening is often enough. It is enough to begin to think of yourself as an agent again, rather than as a passive victim of some horrible circumstances. I am an agent. I can make decisions about this. I can articulate what has happened, and I can put it together, work it out, see where I can find my way around it. I have that ability. You have that ability. Every single person is equipped to do these things. He said to Jean-Paul, man is characterized above all by his going beyond a situation and by what he succeeds in making of what he has been made. That is what clicked in my mind at 17. Damn, I don't have to suffer this world. I am a person. I can be seen, I can be heard, I can get stronger, I can do things. I can be an agent for change, not just for survival. I can be an agent of change. That is a very powerful new way to think about yourself, your life, and your future. So, a philosophical view of our troubles and conflicts. It's a complex thing, but new possibilities emerge. We discover that the self, a couple, a society are not things. They are only a matrix. They are a space with characteristics and givens and possibilities, and we determine what we make it into, and we can change it. There is only one thing that is certain. There will always be change, and because nothing is set but always changes, we are all agents of change. And all these things unfold slowly. Heidegger said, potentiality is more than actuality. That's a very powerful insight. That at any point, what you have done to date, what you are now, is less than what is possible. And what you will become if you go with that flow. But you have to be willing. You have to see it. You have to embrace it. You have to embrace yourself, people. You have to start accepting and respecting and seeing and feeling really who you are. But it will happen. So, I was going to take you through all of these Greek guys, but we don't have time for that now. So let's just say Socrates said the unreflected life is not worth living, and he set off the whole of the history of Western philosophy in doing that. And Marcus Aurelius, about 5 centuries later, said that you shouldn't fear death, but the one thing you should be afraid of is never fully coming to life. And this is always in the back of my mind with each new client. I think, how are you stopping yourself living? How can I help you find the path towards your life? And they got to do it themselves. And of course, the wisdom started flowing long before that, and it's all over the world. Noah, that's 5 millennia ago. Krishna is 4 millennia ago. Moses, Zoroaster, Lao Tse, Buddha, Confucius, and Socrates. These are all people who did that same journey. The journey towards wisdom, the journey towards understanding that paradox is part of our lives. How can we find ourselves in that? Socrates was the one who said, my only wisdom is that I know nothing. And it's true. None of us really ever know anything. We just live things and we figure things out. Life is one long experiment to try and figure it out. But we don't actually have the truth or the knowledge. I still think that the cave, the allegory of the cave, getting out from the darkness into the light, is a wonderful allegory for psychotherapy. Aristotle added a lot about what is a good life, what are virtues. There's much to learn from that. Epicure showed us how to remove our corrupting desires. And the skeptics taught us, rather like CBT, to be slightly skeptical and critical of absolutely everything, and therefore not to care so much that it upsets you. That was basically what the skeptics did. The Stoics have a lot to teach us. They're very popular at the moment. People are reading the Stoics again because they discovered the importance of working at it. Not to take it for granted, but to organize your mind and your soul and to exercise it, to create moral fiber and to get emotional strength and to realize that virtue is its own reward. But I won't go into the detail. I have said quite enough. I won't tell you about Spinoza either. These are some of the existential philosophers that we always draw on in our training because they all have so much wisdom to impart. And I could talk for an hour about each of them with great passion. Kierkegaard is a favorite though, because he wrote about paradox more and better than most. And he understood that a person is a synthesis between possibility and necessity. So you have to learn what are the necessary things for you to do. What are the things you must attend to and deal with, and how can you deal with them best? And then you might find your possibility. And you will find that your existence is very much like breathing. He means breathing in, what is necessary, breathing out, what can I do to free myself? And it is not either or, it is both, always. Because breathing is something you keep doing. It's like walking, left, right, and you rebalance the whole time. In your breathing, you rebalance the whole time as well. So that's what paradox is about. That's what polarity is about. They are opposites which are inevitable. They are opposites that relate to each other and that work together. They create energy. Positive pole, negative pole is a charge. Work with the charge. Life is a balance between anxiety and despair, Kierkegaard said in The Sickness Unto Death. Dialectics comes from Hegel, who understood that human evolution proceeds through conflict. There is something that is being said, there is an opposition to it, and then we discover that we need to make room for both these opposing things and have a broader concept that can encompass them. That's how we transcend the opposites and we come to a synthesis in order to learn and adapt. The paradoxes of human existence, death and pain, loneliness and rejection, weakness and failure, meaninglessness and futility can only be tackled by facing them rather than pretending they don't exist, which inevitably leads to problems in living, like an unlived life, or constant fear, or bullying, or being bullied, or narcissism, or self-destruction, or fanaticism, or apathy. Jaspers is a very good philosopher on this too, because he spoke about limit situations. We all have to face them, particularly those four: struggle, kampf, death, Tod, chance or hazard, Zufall, and guilt, Schuld. They're inevitable, so we need to get better at dealing with them. Jean-Luc Nancy talked about them as liminal spaces in which your transformation will happen. Right, we have no more time left, so we need to get to the end, and I can't tell you about my wonderful theory of emotions, which is based on the idea of paradox, and you can find it in my book Paradox and Passion, and it will explain to you the meaning of each kind of emotion and how the emotions sit together on the same spectrum as the colors of the rainbow, and they relate to each other in a very logical primary and secondary way. And when you know them, you will be able to work with any emotion in yourself and in your clients from a much greater place of clarity, because you will understand how they are all, each emotion is related to going up towards what you value or going down away from what you value. And this happens at all the four levels of life. And this is how we find our courage, by facing up to the losses and allowing ourselves the anxiety to re-engage with life again and again. Camus said, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." That is because, guys, in one state, the seed for the next state is already present, and life is cyclical. And when you unite yourself with that, you get strength and you feel life burning inside of you. I'll finish with James Baldwin, who said, "The longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether we call it friendship or family or romance, or psychotherapy is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light. I wish you much light on the path. We are all in the business of creating clearings where people can see the light again when they had lost it. And it often comes from seeing things in opposites and seeing how they relate together. Get that bird's eye view and you will find your way and embrace your existence. Thank you very much for being here today.